Okay, this is the second part of the unwrapping homework. So this case, if you download the file that has part 2 in it in the name, from the Canvas page, we have a hatchet, and we also have a bucket. And so hatchet's going to be kind of similar to our other objects, and then the bucket is going to introduce us to some new ideas or new terms for unwrapping. So this hasn't been unwrapped yet, so this doesn't look very good, but we're going to go ahead and take it to the next step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go make sure I open up well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my textures are showing up. So if your textures aren't showing up, just make sure that you select the object, go to attribute editor, go to its color attribute, and find the image, and hopefully you downloaded it. So that's a separate file that's on my computer somewhere, and so that should be included with the submission files, or the assignment files. And same thing with the wood. Go to the color, go find the image and bring that in. So let's do, I don't know if this one has old wood, so I'll say open. Okay, and if your textures still aren't showing up, make sure that you have textures turned on right here, this textured viewport. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and go to UV editing. We're going to go ahead and start with the head of the axe. I'm going to go ahead and click on isolate to focus on it. I'll turn off that checkerboard for a second. All right, so you can kind of see the semblance of the default cube UV layout that comes with a box that you create, a polycube. And so we're obviously going to have to start from something fresh because this is a little too messy, too messed up. So I'm just going to go ahead and do create planar. And I'll do this one from the side. And so I'll just rotate this in the planar projection attribute tab, 0 degrees in the y-axis, so it's coming from the side. Let's go ahead and make the width and height the same. Again, not that this really matters that much because we're going to be cutting it and unfolding it, and cutting it and unfolding is going to ignore this initial projection for the most part. Okay, let's go ahead and I'll go back to object mode, just take a look at that. So it's looking good from the side. Texture, we see a lot of repeating, but for the most part it's looking good. But obviously on the tops and bottoms, everything that wasn't in the same plane or direction as that projection is getting stretched. And that's because, those faces have no texture space, right? They're just flattened. And so it's just stretching out that texture in such a little tiny area. So we need to cut this up. We can cut it up multiple ways, like most things. Oh, let me turn off, I think, do I have self-select? Okay, good. So we need to cut it up into simpler shapes so we can unfold it, because if I just grab this and let's go to the UV toolkit and I unfold it, it's either not going to work, in my case it's not even letting me do it, which might just be a bug, or it'd just be like some of our other situations, like the sword blade. When I didn't cut the sword blade in half and just try to unfold it, just squashed it into nothingness. So we're going to have to cut it up. So I'm going to go ahead, and there's a couple ways we could do it. We could do it like a box, right, where there's a top part, a bottom part. Let's try and get this bottom part, the back part. Let's see, that one, and maybe this front part right here. So we could do something like that, not going all the way through, and cut it into 6 sides. Or we could do kind of like we did with the sword blade, where we cut one half off of the other half. And I think both of those routes have their advantages and disadvantages. Let's go ahead and try this one first. This is probably the route I won't go, but I want to show you how this will look. So go grab UV shell. One thing I'm definitely going to want to cut out is going to be the middle, right? Because in the middle, we have this middle interior that is going to add, you'll see if I take this, let's go to UV shell. I'll select this UV shell and I'm going to isolate it by clicking on the little isolate button. You'll see this is still a 3-dimensional object, and this is going to overlap right here if I try to flatten it out. So it's not going to let me flatten that out because this part's always going to either overlap over here or it's going to distort a lot, just like any other 3D object that hasn't been cut up enough. So I'm going to have to cut this interior off. So let's isolate that. Let's go back to object mode and then isolate it again. So I'm going to go ahead and select this edge right here and this edge down here, and we'll just go ahead and go cut to cut that off. And let's go to UV shell. So we'll just pull that off, pull this off. Those pieces I'm not going to really care about right now. We can come back to it later. And since they're on the inside, in reality, you don't really have to care about them that much because no one's going to really see them. But let's go ahead and try unfolding these. So I'll go ahead and click unfold, and we'll click unfold. So the one thing I know is going to be an issue with this is that there's going to be some distortion in these areas, in these corners, because this is still a very 3-dimensional object, right? We have a back, side, and top, and they're all connected. Anywhere where you have a corner, right, like a three-dimensional corner, like this right here is a corner, right? It has a top, side. It has more than just two sides or directions to it. It has three. Is going to get distortion to it. So you either have to live with the distortion or you have to try to fix it. And so if we turn on that distortion display, again, I don't know if this, in my opinion, I don't think the distortion display is always the best indicator. So let's take a look at that because it doesn't look too bad. But if we look at the checkerboard, and let's make these guys smaller so I can see a little bit better. And honestly, it's not the worst, to be honest. This right here, we're definitely getting some warping, right? You can see some warping right here. Like it's shrinking down up into this spot right here, whereas these guys are mostly flat. We do have some irregularity in size and shape, so over here this is smaller than this right here, which isn't great. And if I put on a texture, let's turn that off for a second, right? You can kind of see that the texture over here is smaller than the texture over here, right? So that irregular size in my those UVs is causing a change in size of my texture, which probably isn't going to be good. So let's go ahead and try a different route. So I'll take this, let's turn that checkerboard back on. Or actually, let's turn that off. It's a little distracting. So I'll grab these guys, pull them up, scale them up again. Alrighty. So what I might do instead is I might try to just cut this top part off. So, because this is a very three-dimensional, the top and bottom, I'll probably cut both of them off. So they're very three-dimensional objects here. So I'll just go all the way around right there to cut that top part off, and I'm going to have to cut the bottom part off as well. So just go all the way around here. Just got to get that tip right there so it fully cuts off, otherwise it's still going to be attached to the other piece. And we'll go ahead and go, I can hold shift right click and then do cut. UV shell, let's grab these guys, unfold. Okay. And these two, they don't need to be separated anymore right there. So I can go ahead and restitch them together. So I'll maybe stitch them together right there. I'll stitch them together right here. I don't want to stitch the, well, I can, no, I'm not going to stitch these guys together yet. I will at some point though. So we'll go ahead and pull that off. And we'll get that, and right here as well. So I'm just going to take those two halves of the top and bottom and restitch them back together because there's no real reason for them to be, like this half to be separate from this half. If anything, remember, whenever we make a cut, it introduces a texture seam in our model. So it just means that there's another texture seam I'd have to worry about. So I'm going to go and click on this and go move and sew. I'm probably going to have to re-unfold these again. So unfold, unfold, just to kind of relax them out as much as possible. And because I welded them together along that edge, now there's no more texture seam there. Of course, we still need to unfold the sides, but you can see there's a bit of a texture, or there's definitely going to be a texture seam here. And again, it's going to be kind of similar to one of the objects I had unwrapped earlier. I believe it was the sword. Yes, right, the sword, the hilt of the sword. I was saying like where you put those texture seams is important. So yeah, you might want to think like, where am I going to see, which part's going to be most visible on my model, right? Am I going to see up here? Am I going to see down here? So since I'm not going to see down here, I can probably get away with having a texture seam down here. But up here is a place where I'd probably want to reconsider putting a texture seam because we're going to end up with a, this part's going to be much more visible. Let's go ahead and grab these guys right here. Let's try unfolding them again. So they're not great in this case. You can see there's some distortion right here. Let's take a look at the distorted view, right? You can see that there as well. Part of that issue, I think, has to do with the fact that this turns so much right here, turns up. What I might be able to do is I might be able to cut it along the corner right here, which is going to let this kind of flap right here flip up. Let's turn off both of these guys. If I cut it right here just at that corner, I'll let this little flap right here flip up. But right now, because it's kind of pulled to this side right here, it's like we still have this three-dimensional corner. And it's keeping everything kind of pulled tight down together. And so it's not letting it unfold properly. So I can try there first. So I might even go all the way down to there and do cut. And so now let's go ahead and grab that UV shell. And we'll go ahead and go to unfold. Okay, and now let's take a look at the distortion. and you'll see that distortion went away, right? That's because when we had this sewed together, we still have it on this issue, or on this side probably, but actually it's gone now. But it was having a hard time unfolding this piece right here because it was being forced to be held down at this corner right here as it turned. It's, again, think of it like a three-dimensional object and a three-dimensional corner, right? If I wanted to pull these faces right here up, like I want to flip them up so they're flat with this right here, it's going to pull right here against this edge right here, which is turning this direction. So by cutting it, it's like unfolding a cardboard box. It's much easier for me to flip this up and then flip this up in the opposite direction. So these are called, I mean, some other people might have different terms for it. I could probably stitch this part back together. And turn off that UV distortion, and we'll just go move and sew. I call these darts, and so this is like a term for clothing. A dart is put into fabric to either pull something closer together or give a little bit more space and a little bit more area for it to relax. And so I call these darts because I use these to kind of help little areas unfold a little bit better without having to completely cut them off or put an edge that goes all the way through. And I might cut that on the other side too, even though I don't think that was really having a problem. So these two objects right here, so this object right here and this object right here, for the most part are pretty flat, right? They're really easy to work with because they're not really three-dimensional, right? Because I got the top and bottom off of that. And what I could do is I actually have an opportunity to get rid of a texture seam because I can combine this side or stitch one edge on this side and this side together to get rid of a texture seam. I don't want to do both sides, like I don't want to stitch this side and this side back together. Let's do that really quickly. Because if I did that, modify, cut and sew. Right? Problem with that is, of course, UV shell unfold. Right now it's back to being a really challenging three-dimensional object. It's like that cylinder that I was referencing earlier, and especially with the sword blade, right? It's like I'm trying to squash it down this way, and I'm going to end up with like a lot of weird distortion going on. Right? Look at that. That's really bad down there. So I'm not going to do it that way. I'm not going to stitch together both sides, but I can stitch together one side. I could do the tip of this blade, but honestly, because this is such a sharp object right here, I'm not really going to be seeing this side of side of this object right here and this side of the object at the same time. You see that? Like I'd have to look straight onto it to see it, and so I'm not really going to actually notice a texture jump between here and here or a seam. So that's probably an area where it's okay to have a texture seam in this case, because I'm not really going to see those two at the same time, and I'm not going to notice a discrepancy between the texture here and here. But this right here, it's much more noticeable, right? Because I see these at the same time. So you can kind of see, this texture is maybe not the best one to show this off, but let's look at it with the checkerboard. So you can see, it creates this texture seam that's very obvious right there. So I'm going to go ahead and just select that back edge, starting from here down to here. And I'm just going to go ahead and move and sew. And because I did move and sew, I probably don't really even need to unfold this that much, but that part right there is probably going to be a little distorted. So I'm just going to click on unfold. I haven't talked about optimize before, as far as I can tell. But the difference between unfold and optimize is very minimal. Optimize is going to be very similar to unfold in the sense that it's trying to reduce the distortion in your mesh. And unfold is going to be kind of like the bigger operation that's going to take all your pieces that you've stitched or unstitched and try to lay them out flat. So optimize, I guess it depends on who you talk to. In my opinion, I don't feel like there's very much of that big of a difference to really notice between them. I maybe use optimize once in a while if I feel like I'm still getting distortion when I shouldn't be. And then optimize gets rid of it. With unfold, just can't figure it out. But most of the time, I think they're pretty much the same thing. Optimize just does a little bit more of unfold, but not the same stuff that unfold does. So one of my issues, though, this is something you have to consider, is that by stitching this side here to this side here, I've made this UV shell really long. And so in order to put it into my space, let's go to Arrange and Layout, click on Layout, and we can do that with everything, right? Layout. It's forced this to be small, right? Which means that I have less texture space on my texture image to map onto my model, right? because I had to make this much smaller, right? Whereas if it was when it was cut in half, like they would fit in like this, and they'd have much larger texture space, right? If I look at the checkerboard, you can see I can fit way more of these squares in than if I had this longer one, right? There's a lot fewer squares, much larger, and that also, if I want to have an even I forgot about those guys. If I wanted to have an even texel size, aka I want to make sure that the checker size is the same on this shell and this shell, like they're the same on the model, right? And not one being drastically larger or smaller than the other, right? Which causes problems later on in texturing. If I want these to be the same, because has to be smaller, it's also forcing these guys to be smaller. Like they had to be smaller too, in order to keep that checkerboard even. So that's something that you would have to consider, because if you have a really, really, really long UV shell, everything else has to be much smaller, and you're kind of wasting a lot of space. So as with everything else with UV unwrapping, there is a balancing act you have to manage of getting rid of texture seams, getting rid of distortion, maximizing your texture resolution space. So those are all things that it really is a case-by-case situation. So if I came in here and I cut this, I'll show you guys. UV shell. Now when I lay it out, you'll see these are going to get bigger, and these also are going to be bigger too, right? So they have a lot more texture resolution to work with. So either one, I think, is going to be fine in this case. It's really your call. And again, I think it's really situational. In this case, I'll just leave them both disconnected. Something else I could probably do is, I'm sure that this piece right here has some distortion, and I could probably try checking it. Again, I don't think the UV distortion thing always shows actual distortion or problem areas. In that case, I try to do it with the checkerboard. So I might grab this and scale this up so maybe we can see more squares. And I'm just going to check these areas right here. And I might go ahead and do, oh, there we go. It's a little bit better. And if I don't want to see these lines, I can go to Show, Selection Highlighting to turn off those lines so I don't see them. But yeah, you can see right there, these are getting a little distorted. There's a little bit of bending and warping. And that's because, again, this little, let's go back to Show, Selection Highlighting. And let me go ahead and turn off the checkerboard. That's because it's a very three-dimensional object right here. And then it also has a corner, right? So remember, those three-dimensional corners are going to give us a problem. So if you wanted to, this might be overkill. It really depends. I could grab this and I could cut that off. So cut. And remember, every time, let's go ahead and grab all these guys and lay them out. Whenever you make a cut, you're introducing a new texture seam, but you're also reducing the amount of distortion you're going to have. So just keep all those things in mind. And I might go ahead and, again, this is where you're balancing where you want your texture seams, right? I can cut it off like this, and it's going to lay out pretty easily. And I could maybe even cut it right here so that this little cylindrical piece will lay out flat. So I'll just go to cut. So this is that little cylindrical piece, and because I cut it right here, it's going to lay out like a flat strip. So I'll go, let's go unfold, right? And then same thing with this guy, I can just grab that. That's already pretty much a flat object. That guy wasn't having any hard times. Okay. So I could do that, or what I could do alternatively is kind of cut it again like a box, where I unfold like the back flap, right? Let's go all the way through. Unfold the side flaps and the front flaps. And so essentially, I'm just making my object kind of unfold like I would a box, like a real life cardboard box. Just cutting it at the corners, and go cut, UV shell, click on that, I'll go modify, unfold. And so that's going to ease that distortion. You can see it's really not changing that much. So in all honesty, it's probably not that required, because it's really not changing the UVs that much. If anything, it's only really affecting these areas. But again, because I'm cutting it, I'm introducing new texture seams. So what I might do is I might Control Z back and just leave those corners on, because I don't think that distortion is that noticeable or that obvious. Might as well, even though we don't see the inside, I might as well make sure I clean this up a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab this edge here down to here. Actually, no, it's already good. So I just select this and go unfold. It's already stitched together. Kind of like, remember, it's like a cylinder, right? And I'm just cutting an edge right here so it'll lay out flat. I'm going to re-isolate that. And so let's go ahead and grab this all. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm straightening my, or aligning my UVs. So I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this, and then grab this edge, and go orient to edges to straighten it out. Grab this one, orient to edges, and this is just aligning them. Orient to edges, orient to edges, etc., etc. That's just going to kind of straighten them out. That's not always important, but I personally like doing it all the time. And we're going to go ahead and lay this out. So the problem is, to pack everything in, we're getting this guy. This guy is kind of taking up a lot of space, even though we really don't see him at all, because we have the handle gets in the way. So what I might do is I might pull this up off. I might grab these and go layout, so they have as much space as possible. And then I can pull this one in here and just squeeze him into a spot, right? So let's say I want to rotate him here, J, right there, and I might rotate him like that. And so he's in there, he can have texture, but in reality, I'm not going to see it, so I'm going to de-emphasize him. And sometimes this happens. So in general, I was saying that you want these checkerboards to be even across your whole object. Obviously, it's not the same here. But there also, again, is a situation where you want certain objects or certain things to have more texture space just because they're much more prominent and visible. If you try to make everything have the same texel size in all situations, then you're going to be working with having to make much bigger texture images just to make sure everything is getting a nice amount of detail and not getting too low res. But it's really a case-by-case situation. Another example you would see that with is like a human or a person. Like if you see a human UV layout, usually the head will be bigger than the rest of the body because the head is much more visible all the time. Like you look at the face, you look at the head more in detail, so they usually give more space for the head and the face and less for like things like the feet or the legs, right? Because those are parts that you don't really look at that much. Okay, so we got the head going on this guy, and he's looking decent. It's looking good enough. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the handle. So I'm going to go ahead and isolate this. This one's going to be pretty easy. It's going to be like the shovel, and it's going to be like the sword handle, right? It's pretty much just a cylinder. A cylinder is probably one of the easiest objects to unwrap. So I'm going to go ahead and create a planar projection. I'm not going to really rotate it because it doesn't really matter. It's already looking decent. Right. We are getting some stretching, so you can see there's stretching right here. If I looked at it with a checkerboard, it's probably a little bit more obvious, right? Weird stretching. So definitely there's some huge irregularities going here, but it's not the worst. I'm going to go ahead and cut off the top, which is going to just be like the cap of a cylinder. I'm going to cut off the top of it because it's going to make it less three-dimensional. So I'm going to do cut. And I might cut the bottom off, but it's going to be like my shovel, right? With my shovel, the top of the shovel, I made sure that the cap kind of restitched or was connected all the way to the main body instead of being cut off like this piece right here. And actually, you know what? Something I didn't consider is we have this object covering a spot where we can put texture seams. So what I might do is, let's go back here. I might cut it maybe right here. Or maybe even right here. Yeah, I'm not sure if I would do that, actually. Maybe I'll just cut it right here, and I might cut in one spot. But, yeah, so I might go ahead and cut that here instead, just to, push the seam further out of sight, so it's not going to, there's no possibility of being seen, even though I don't think it would be. So I might go ahead and grab this right here. We'll go cut, move in so, and I'll just cut this up here because it's going to be a very three-dimensional UV shell, and that's not going to be very nice. We're going to get a lot of distortion in this area where it's like three-dimensional where you have these corners. So by cutting it like this, it's going to unfold a little bit nicer. Or I could cut it maybe like that right there. So I'll go ahead and do cut. We'll grab this UV shell, and we'll go ahead and modify unfold. Okay. So that'll look pretty good, but we'll have to align this with the texture in a little bit. But at least it's unfolding nicely. So we have just this cylinder shape right here. I could cut off the bottom, and I might do that, but I think what I'm probably going to do is let's cut off the bottom. If it helps, it's not a bad idea to cut it into more pieces and then you can start sewing them back together. Sometimes it's easier to break down your object if it's more pieces. And so I'll just grab that bottom cap, just like the top cap, and cut it off. Cut. And now I'm left with this middle part right here. And so this tube right here is just like any cylinder, right? It wraps on itself. I'm going to find an edge that goes all the way through so it can unwrap into a flat object. So maybe I'll just select this edge that goes all the way down here. Let's go ahead and unisolate that. Let's do cut. Okay. Go back to UV shell, select that guy, and now let's go ahead and unfold all these pieces. So we'll go and click unfold. All right. Let me go ahead and rotate this like that, and I'll rotate this, and let's go select these edges, going down the middle of them, and I'll just go ahead and orient it to edges, UV shell, grab these guys, let's go ahead and lay them out. That's looking pretty good. We'll see right here there's a texture seam, so if I wanted to, what I can do is maybe this is a part that I will see down here, so I might go ahead and restitch those back together. So I'll go ahead and stitch this edge back together, but the problem is it's going to be very three-dimensional, so instead what I might do is I might continue this cut down here in a second. So I'll go cut and sew, move and sew, and so you can see this is going to have a lot of distortion. I can just grab it and go unfold, and you'll see, right? It's going to cause a lot of distortion in the rest of my object right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and continue this cut right here down this way. And so we'll just do cut, UV shell, and we'll just do unfold. Oop, that's not what I wanted to do. Unfold. Okay, and that's looking better. And let's go ahead and scale that in. And so that texture continues around that edge right there, which is kind of nice. I think this is looking decent, and there's not much I would change to it, but if you wanted this grain to kind of follow, and we'll see this on the next object, if you want the grain to follow the shape of something that's kind of, it's like curved or bent, then what you might want to do is you might want to grab, in this case I might go ahead and cut this in half first, so we'll just do cut. So it's two pieces, just because it's going to help a little bit with this case. I can go modify straighten edges, or straighten UVs. Modify straighten UVs. The corners aren't going to do a very good job, so we'll have to take a look at that later in a second. But if I take a look at this, you'll see now that grain is like following the shape of the object. So that texture is kind of following the shape of object. So that straighten UVs is really handy for that kind of setup. So I might grab these guys in the front right here. And let's go ahead and sew them back together. Modify. Cut, move and sew. These guys down here, I need to do something with that part. What I could do is I could just grab these UVs down here and just go unfold. Maybe that'll help a little bit. Maybe scale it out so it's a little bit straighter in that direction. And so that probably looks pretty good. All right, so you can see that grain kind of follows the shape. It's not very even or realistic, right? Because you'll see this might be a hard example or difficult example to show, but these are smaller and squashed this way. These ones up here are stretched horizontally, so that is a consideration. But in my opinion, I think this looks good enough. All right, so that's the hatchet. Let's move on to the bucket. Oh wait, sorry, I need to fix this part up here. So this doesn't really make much sense with the texture grain, right? Because the texture grain is going up this way, this way, this way. You would expect this strip or this grain to go across that way, but it's going at a weird diagonal direction. So I want to go ahead and grab this. Let's grab this UV shell and let's rotate this so it's more in line with the direction we're going with. Okay, so we have the grain in this case now going up this way, and then when it turns across over this side, it's going across that way. So that looks a little bit better. It doesn't really make much sense though, because you probably would have like rings, right? Instead of actually having, in reality, like the texture grain is also going up this way, but then it's going the opposite direction. So really, this texture doesn't really make that much sense because we'd probably get like rings, like if you cut a piece of wood in half, like a piece of wood that was like this. If you cut it in half, you would see like a ring pattern instead of these stripes going this direction. but that's fine. We're not going to really worry about that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab the hatchet. I'm going to hide it. Let's go ahead and show the bucket. And I'm just doing that with hide and show in the display panel. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and focus on this guy. So this one's actually made up of a bunch of different objects. I personally want to keep it separate objects. And also, this is going to be really tedious, right? Look at how many of these spars there are. I actually don't really know. There's probably somewhere around 20 or 20, I think about 20 of them. Yeah, it looks like there's about 20. This is a fourth, and I have 5 selected, so that's 20. So I don't want to UV unwrap each one of these separately. So we're going to use this as an example for a couple things. One, doing that straightening again. We're going to do that straightening on these to make sure the texture is following the shape. And then 2, we're going to use this to duplicate our work. And there's a couple ways we can do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on one plank at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this one. I'll go ahead and isolate it. Press F on my keyboard to focus on this object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut this like most objects I've cut before that are cube or square. I can cut it like an actual box, right? Where you cut it along the corner so it can lay out flat or unfold. The sides, tops, front, back, and bottom. What I might do in this case, though, as well, is I might make it so that I want to think about where it's going to be seen, like which parts of this plank is going to be seen. And really, we're only going to be seeing the front, the top lip, and we're also going to kind of see the back lip going into the back on the opposite side. We're not really going to see the sides, and we're not really going to see the bottom. So those are areas that are probably going to be the safest to make cuts. So what I might do is I might go through and I might cut the sides completely off and the bottom as well. And that's just going to make it easier for me to unfold. So I'll just go here, do like this, like that. But I'm keeping the front, the top, and the back stitched together. And so they should unfold kind of like a box into a flat shape really easily. So I'll go in here, let's go ahead and I'm going to turn off the image. I'll go to cut, and we'll just take this UV shell, or all these UV shells, we'll just go shift right click, unfold. Okay, and so now you can see that's pretty straight, or that's a pretty clean UV layout right here, right? There's not going to be much distortion. Let's grab all these pieces and scale them down so we can see the square is a little bit bigger. Right, there's really no distortion along this object, and the texels are pretty much the exact same size. Okay. The only problem I'm going to have here is that I'm going to do this like I'm going to have 20 versions of this, and so I have all these little tiny pieces, and it's kind of a little messy having to manage all those little tiny pieces. So what I might do is I might go ahead and sew them back onto the original, or the main piece, the big main piece that I'm worried about. I might sew these other pieces back onto the original, but without actually stitching them together to make a 3-dimensional object again. So I come up here, like maybe I'll stitch this side piece and this side piece back onto the front, so all the way down to here. And I might stitch the bottom part too, all the way across to here. So I'll go move and sew, UV shell. Let's go ahead and unfold it. So it does affect your UV unwrapping, like it's going to change it, but it really, because these are cut out flat and cut along these corners right here, right? So you see they're cut in that corner right there, this 3-dimensional corner. It's still going to unfold nicely like a box. So there really should be no UV distortion to speak of on this object, and it looks like there isn't any. So it's a pretty simple object. Let me go ahead and I'll turn that off, the UV distortion. I'm going to go ahead and take this and orient to this edge right here. And the one thing I want to do is, if I look at my checkerboard, and it's not super obvious because this object really doesn't, object really doesn't have that much curvature to it. We can probably see it more on the back side, right? Is that because this isn't straight and this is angled, then my texture is actually going to be, let's go ahead and let's scale that back up and rotate it. so that the grain is going with it. Now let's maybe scale it up a little bit. Okay. And this is kind of a weird texture, honestly. It might not be noticeable because it is already so wobbly, but that my grain is kind of going at an angle because my UVs are going at an angle, right? So I pull this down and put that right there. You can see this is going at an angle, and my grain's going straight. And so because these are guys are both pointing in different directions, that's something I'd have to consider. I might change this to a different wood material. So what I might do is maybe this isn't the best one. I'm gonna come in here. I want to switch it back to that old wood. And go back to UV shell. And we can probably scale this back down a little bit. Okay. And so we can see a little bit better that that grain is going across. The only reason why I didn't use this one originally is because this already has spaces between the planks, and that doesn't really make much sense. So what I could do is I could straighten my UVs like I did on the handle. Let's turn off the image so we can see this. So I can just go ahead and grab my, go to Modify, Straighten UVs. Okay. And so what that will do is it'll be just like the handle where it makes sure, you know, this texture is following the shape of the object, and I'm not getting, if I look at this with the checkerboard, right, this line of squares right here is perfectly aligned with this edge right here. Same thing with the back, right? This line right here along the edges of these squares is perfectly aligned right there. So it distorts it a little bit because there's going to be a little bit of stretching up here and a little bit of squashing down here. But if I wanted to, that might be what I do. And I actually think I kind of like that better than what I had before. So you don't always have to straighten your UVs, keep that in mind. But in some cases, it's kind of nice to get the texture to follow the shape a bit better. Okay, so that's one plank done, right? So what I want to do is I need to, like, this doesn't look very realistic. What I need to do is I need to copy this to the other objects. And I'm going to show you two different ways you can do this. The first way is you can use under here mesh transfer attributes. And what transfer attributes does is it takes one object and takes a second object, and it copies something about this object to the other one, right? There's a lot of different things you can do. You can copy the shape of this, this object onto this object. You can copy the position, different things. In this case, I'm going to be copying, I'm turning off vertex, let's see what this looks like by default. Oh, this is what it looks like by default. So I'm going to transfer the UV sets. You don't really have to worry about the color sets if you don't want to. The sample space, this is where it's trying to get a sense of, you know, how am I comparing these two objects together to know which part of the UVs I'm going to copy to. In this case, we're going to be doing, we'll try a world space. If they were right on top of each other, we could do world space, right? If they were, well, we wouldn't do UV because we're copying UVs. If they had the same UVs, but they're different shaped objects, then you could copy their attributes based on their UVs because they have the same UVs. In this case, they have the exact same topology from each other, so I'm going to choose topology. I'll click apply, and you'll see what it does is it copied these UVs and made this object's UVs the exact same. And I can do the same thing, and I keep going across, right? Copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, pretty much with this transfer attributes option that's found underneath mesh. The other thing I could do is, in this situation, it's probably faster, but this isn't always the case, is I'm actually going to delete all of these other pieces. So I'll just go ahead and delete those guys. And I'm just going to duplicate this, because when I duplicate this, it's going to keep the same UV layout. And the same thing with mirroring. If you mirror an object, it's going to have the same UVs on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So just whenever you make a duplicate or you do a mirroring, it's just going to copy the UVs exactly how they are for that duplication or that mirroring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go, let's make sure, I'll have to make sure my pivot point is in the middle of this object, which it is, because I set it up like that for y'all's file. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate and rotate it around like this. Okay, so I'm going to go to Edit, Duplicate Special, and in this case, we had 20 pieces, so I need to make 19 more because I already have one, and I need to rotate them. A circle is 360 degrees, and I'm going to have 20 copies. So if I take 360 divided by 20, that gives me 18. So each one is going to be rotated 18 I make a duplicate, rotate it 18 degrees. So let's just see what it looks like with one at a time. So you see when I makes a duplicate and it rotates it in the y-axis 18 degrees. And I do the same thing, same thing, same thing. You can do it like that. Or what you could do is I can come in here, delete this, and just set this to 19 copies. And it's not moving it, it's not rotating the X or Z, and it's not scaling it. It's just rotating it 18 degrees in the y-axis, and click apply. So that's pretty cool. It just copies my UVs, and that's really quick and handy if those objects are the same. Of course, this isn't always possible. What I don't like about this is these all have the exact same texture on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them all at the same time. And the nice thing is with UV unwrapping is even though objects are separate, you can actually mess with their UVs at the same time. So what I can do is I can grab all these UVs for all these objects. And let's go ahead and go to the UV toolkit and we'll lay this out. And you'll see it went ahead and separated them. And maybe I don't need to have all of them like that. Like let's say I'm going to deselect every other one, or just a random assortment of them. Only reason why I'm doing that is maybe some of them can overlap. It's not that big of a deal because if I make all of them non-overlapping, then I'm kind of reducing the space I have to work with. So if I go modify layout like I did before, you see I had to scale these down quite a bit. If I don't want to scale them down that much, what I might do is I might go ahead and let's go ahead and grab just a random assortment of these. Let's pull these up off. I'll go ahead and grab these guys and do layout so they can be bigger, and I'll grab these guys and do layout. And I might want to do the same amount, so let's make sure we have 10 and 10. So this is 4, 9, so I need one more. Okay, we'll do layout, and we'll do this one layout. Okay, so if I look at this, I'm not seeing any repeating, even though there are repeating. There's one right there that's repeating, and if I really cared, I could just shift this over. Boop. Doesn't really matter in this case. And so there we go. So now we have all these are equal sized. They all have the same UV layout, which is nice and clean and simple. And that was really easy to do. Let's do the rest of this object really quickly. So this part right here, this edge is going to be seen. So that's a part that I care about. Like I want to make sure that this exposed edge and maybe even the bottom are, I don't want that texture seen right there. But there's this gap right here between the the top and the sides. So I might cut that top part off. So I'll select this all the way around right here. And we'll go ahead and do cut. Grab these guys and unfold them. They might not unfold correctly. So this one unfolds, but you can see that kind of unfolded. It's very small. So let's see if we can try doing that. Unfold, layout. Okay, there we go. So those are good. That one's fine. I might go ahead and rotate this. We'll make sure that both of these guys are aligned the same way. And again, we can do the orient to edges. So I'll just select this and this. Orient to edges, so they line up like that. They're probably too big compared to the rest of my object, right? Because you can see these are, this wood grain is very large and now it's very small. So I might need to take these guys and scale them down a little bit to try to match a bit better. So they're kind of like the same size as those planks. Looks like that's probably pretty good. They're separate objects, so I don't have to lay them out together. Like I don't have to have this and this on the same, like lay them out at the same time, because they're separate objects and they're not really gonna impact each other. The rest of the object is going to be pretty easy as well. Let's take a look at these bands. These bands are they're actually cylinders, but they're already disconnected. But they have 3 dimensions to them, right? They have a front, top, bottom, and back side to them. So they're very 3-dimensional. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably just going to cut this in a way so that they can lay out like a flat, kind of like a, well, let's just separate the front and back off of each other. We'll select all the way around. Let's just go ahead and do cut. UV shell, let's grab that down. But it's still not cut off of each other, and that's because right here, and this is kind of a difficult object to look at and see in 3 dimensions, it's still connected right here. So I'll go down right there to completely separate the front and back right there, and I'll have to do the same thing back here. So select that down to here. Okay, and I'll go ahead and cut. UV shell. Now I have 2 different shells. Okay, and I'll do the same thing down here. And I could probably do what I did earlier where let's go ahead and do, actually I'm not sure if I could do it in the same object. I'm not sure if you can do that. I don't think you can. Yeah, if these are separate objects, I could transfer probably the UVs from one to the other because they have the same topology. But I'm not going to, they're the same object, so that doesn't really work. And it's really not going to be that hard to cut it up, so I'm not going to really go through that, worry about doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and move these. So I'm just going to make sure the front and back cut off from each other perfectly. So we'll just do cut, UV shell, modify, unfold. Okay. So one of my problems is these are really long objects, and this is kind of like what I was seeing. Let's take a look at the outside. All right, these are really, well, let's make sure we align these guys. It's going to select somewhere in the middle of these bands. Maybe that's not the middle, that's maybe more of this middle. And then I'll just go to orient to edges, right? I might grab these two right here and rotate them this way. Excuse me. And for these guys, because they curve like this, what I might do is I might do the straighten UVs. And my computer has to think about it for a second. And there's a little bit of funkiness going on in these pieces at the ends, so I'll just go ahead and make sure I select the ends where they have that funkiness. Right there, right there. Those ones are fine. I'll just go ahead and unfold those little tiny pieces right there, just to relax them out a bit. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and lay them out, because right now my problem is they're crossing this UV border right here, and I don't want them to cross that border. So I'll go ahead and click on layout to pack them in. But now this is just like the same problem I was having earlier with the hatchet, where with the hand, I think it was the handle. It might have been, no, it was the head of the axe blade. And so when I connected both sides of the axe blade together, it made a really long UV shell, which meant that when I laid it out and I had to pack it in, it had to get really small, and it has a lot less texture resolution. So I'm running into that issue here as well, is because these are really long. In order to pack them into this single space, this texture is actually getting really low resolution, and they're getting a really tiny amount of space. What I could do, again, this is a potential problem, right, because I'm going to be introducing new texture seams, is I can come in here and cut them in half. Maybe that's not half, maybe this is half? Nope, more like this one right here is half, and this one right here is half. There we go. All right, so I'll do cut. I'll grab my UV shells, grab these, go modify layouts. I'll just do it down here. And you see, because I cut them in half, I could squeeze them in better, and they get much more texture resolution, which is great. So those guys are easy. I'm not going to worry about the screws, just because it's a little extra, it's busy work. Let's go ahead and focus on this handle. So this handle is literally just a cylinder all the way around, and it connects back onto itself. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect it in one way, so I can almost kind of like I could lay it out flat like a single cylinder. Like, you know, I could take this piece off and take this piece off and move them apart and try to lay it out flat. So I'll start there. And it's also a nice spot because I can't see it, so it's a good place to have a texture seam. And by the way, I've been pressing Control 1 this entire time. Control 1's the hotkey for isolate selected, and so that's what I've been doing to get the isolate selected to do that. So I'll select that edge and I'll go cut, UV shell, unfold. It's not going to unfold nicely, right, because it's still a very three-dimensional object, right, and you can see that's clearly not looking good. So I'll keep it cut. What I'm going to do is, just like with a normal cylinder, right, because this is still a cylinder, is I'm going to find an edge that's going to let it cut out and unfold flat. So it's probably best to do this in the back because I'm not going to see the back so much. So I'll go ahead and select that edge right there, cut, UV shell, modify, unfold, and there we go. So that lays it out flat like a piece of paper. I'm running into the same problem, most likely. We'll take a look at this actually. Let's see what this looks like. We'll go to object mode. It might not be noticeable. It's actually pretty good. If I was worried about, and we'll go ahead and do my layout, and then we'll probably go ahead and orient to edges. So orient to edges, UV shell, layout. If this was a much larger object, I'd probably be concerned because just like this right here, because this is stitched all the way back around itself like this, it could be a really long UV shell. If it's a really long UV shell, then I end up getting very little texture space on my UV layout. But in this case, since they're such small objects, I don't think that's an issue. I might also want to check the checkerboard size. And it looks like this one's a little bit smaller on the texture size, which means that it has more texture space than it needs probably. So I might scale this down a little bit and then just compare to this object. And that looks a little bit better. I might look at the texture also, and it's so unnoticeable, just because this object is so thin or small, but that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do this object next. This object's already pretty good, but we're getting, right here, we have a weird stretch going on that is really unnecessary. And the back we're not gonna really see, so again, that's another spot that's kind of unnecessary, but we're just gonna do good UV unwrapping anyways. So this is a really flat object already. So this is really like the sword blade, right? Earlier is a really flat object is really easy to unfold because it already is flat in a single direction. So I'm just going to cut the front and the back away off of it. Let's do right here and here. And I'll go ahead and cut it in half so it goes all the way around. And I'll go ahead and go to cut. And I'll grab these UV shells. Go ahead and go unfold. Okay, and those are going to lay out almost perfectly flat. They look like little ghosts. And if I look at this, that's going to have no distortion down there now, which is nice. And yeah, a very simple object to unfold. UV shell, let's drop distortion. We're going to orient to edges so we can get these lined up correctly. Orient to edges. And I'll just grab these guys and modify layout. Okay. Probably much too large than it needs to be, right? Because if I compare it to the squares on this object and this object, right, those squares are much larger. So I'll go ahead and grab these UV shells for this object. And I'll go ahead and scale them down. Something like that. And I'll want to double check and just make sure the texture looks good on it. I can make it a little bit bigger. Doesn't really matter that much. And now the next step is I need to make sure that I need to do this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that transfer attributes. I wouldn't want to do that duplicate thing. I could, but the problem is these aren't easily like flipped or rotated or mirrored across. So to get this in the exact same position again, they're not actually like really symmetrical, right? This one's a little off axis. It's a little over this. Let's see if I can look at this from the bottom. Let's see. 4-panel layout. Let's take a look at it from the top. So you can see these aren't actually like really mirrored across each other. They might be. I didn't mean for them to be, but they might be actually. But they might be a little off axis, so I'm not going to really easily be able to do the duplicate special thing because I have 3 different objects here, here, and here, and I want to get all 3 of them in the exact same spot. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do that transfer attributes. So I'm going to select this guy, then select this guy. I'm going to go to modify, or actually I want this one. This one's the good one. Sorry, it's easy to get backwards. Select this one, little 2 ghosts, and select the other one hasn't been unwrapped. I go to mesh. Transfer attributes. Let's open the settings for that. I'm going to do UV sets by topology. Click apply. Okay. Do the same thing with the handle. Select that one and then that one. Apply. And there we go. That's pretty much it. So we got to see how to do the straightening, of course, but mostly this one was just to demonstrate how to duplicate your work easily with UV unwrapping. And so this is probably how I would leave it, besides the screws. I didn't work on the screws. If, for instance, like the metals, like the only problem with the metals is like I feel like these two really aren't utilizing the space that well, but that's because of these bands. So in order to get these bands to fit in here, these guys have to be a little bit smaller. So I was just checking that texture resolution and thinking to myself, like, is that enough texture resolution? Like, does that texture look decent? And in this case, I think it does look okay. We also have on the wooden spars, right? We made sure that that top, front, and back are stitched together so there's a continuation. There's not a texture seam here, which makes that easy to, like, we're not going to notice a texture seam on those objects. And then these guys, in the bottom I also have made sure the size was kind of at least comparable to this piece right here so that they're not noticeably different in size of the texture. Like, it's not like this, which is going to look like those are really tiny planks, whereas these are much larger planks. So I just want to make sure they're the same size. But since they're all separate objects, I'm not going to worry about them too much if it's not visibly noticeable. And so that's the last object, and so hopefully through all 5 of these objects you guys have a better understanding of how to approach UV unwrapping. The basic premise is you just want to break it down into simpler shapes and by cutting it up and then unfolding it out so it can unfold as flat as possible. If it's still 3D, it's a very three-dimensional object, then you just need to cut it more so it unfolds better. Try to get rid of your distortion, and then you can re-sew pieces back together to reduce seams, texture seams, so that you don't have those texture interruptions. And that's it.